Good morning. You're listening to Retake Our Democracy, a 30-minute weekly show that airs at 8:30 a.m. each Saturday morning on KSFR 101.1 FM, your Santa Fe public radio station. And I'm Paul Gibson, the host of Retake Our Democracy. Today, we will be talking with Land Commissioner Stephanie Garcia Richard. We will get to Stephanie in just a moment, but first, a couple of quick announcements. I want to remind you that if you're listening to this show while driving around town, and miss any of today's show, you can watch the full YouTube recording of this show and any prior show by going to retakeourdemocracy.org and clicking on the Retake on the Radio button on the right side of the homepage. You'll find YouTube recordings of all our previous shows listed in chronological order, so you can binge watch Retake radio shows for free. Yippee. Before we get started, I also want to acknowledge that we're conducting this show on stolen Tewa land, and I want to acknowledge our Tewa neighbors for being such good stewards of the land. We can learn much from their custodial caring for the land, water, and air. Last announcement, on October 26th from 6 p.m. to 7:30, Retake will be hosting a Zoominar conversation with the public banking about public banking in New Mexico. Along with leadership from the public banking campaign, we'll have farmers and ranchers describing how their inability to secure loans from local banks has limited their ability to expand their farm production or build a stronger farm-to-table system. We'll hear how a state public bank could provide the capital needed to make that happen. We think establishing a state public bank could create a great source of capital for a wide range of projects in New Mexico, projects that could diversify and democratize the New Mexico state economy. But we need well-informed advocates and allies to talk with their legislators to get them educated about what is involved and what a great opportunity this is. This Zoom will be a great way to prepare for the 2023 session. For more information and to register, go to retakeourdemocracy.org, click on Actions and Events in the homepage banner, and on that page near the top, you will see information and a link to the Zoominar so you can register, because you got to register. Okay, let's meet Commissioner Richard and find out more about what the commissioner is doing to protect our land and water. Welcome to the show, Stephanie.
Hello, Paul. It's great to be with you today.
It's kind of odd seeing just your picture there because it feels like you're just scrutinizing me. Stephanie is just using an image for her picture. That doesn't matter to you listening on the radio, but it does for the YouTube recording. I'd like to let our guests introduce themselves. So how about you tell us a little bit about how it is you made the decision to move from being a legislator about a little over 4 years ago to run for Land Commission. What was that about?
Thank you. Yeah. So just for your listeners and I guess viewers as well, I was a public school teacher for a number of years. And I did do the Emerge training that trains Democratic pro-choice women to run for office, because it's not, well, certainly when I took that Emerge training, there were much fewer women electeds in state and federal offices. And I made the decision to run for legislature based on the fact that I felt that a teacher's voice was needed in the roundhouse. We have many more teacher voices there now, I'm very happy to say. And so things like universal free early childhood education have been championed by some of those colleagues in the House that are educators. And you're right, Paul, 4 years ago, I did make the decision to turn from the legislative world to contemplate a statewide office. And just for folks who are not familiar with the land office and the state land commissioner, it is the elected individual responsible for our state natural resources. So things like our 13 million acres of state land, the ecosystems on that land, the wildlife, the habitats, the watersheds. We have one individual we elect that stewards those resources on our behalf and stewards them for the purpose of drawing revenue for public schools. And so I felt that as a school teacher, I was in a unique position. I had a unique perspective to be able to understand what every single dollar that is earned at the land office on behalf of public schools means to a classroom, means to a teacher, means to a student. So I've prided myself actually, Paul, on going toe to toe with the industry to negotiate for every last dollar that we can get on behalf of school children in New Mexico. And you know, at the time, I had to give up my legislative seat to run for this statewide office, and folks did not understand that choice that I had made, but I felt that it was the right thing to do. And I think my first term has been the indication that I made the right choice.
Yeah, we're going to get to some of your accomplishments in your first term, but when you were elected as land commissioner, in what condition was the land office in terms of funding, staffing, and procedures for conducting its work? And what did you do to address those conditions?
So that is a great question, Paul. I remember I had just won my election, and I was not sworn in yet. I was not the land commissioner yet, but I did attend a budget hearing for the former administration, for the previous land commissioner. I had to sit in front of Legislative Finance Committee and ask for his budget to run the operations, to run the land office. It's an office of about, well, at that time it was about 150 individuals who do the work at the land office. And he made this statement like to the legislators, something along the lines of, you know, we don't have enough employees in the office to do the audits on oil and gas, so I suggest that you start to contract out for those audits. And let me just describe, Paul, the importance of the land office, your public land office, auditing the oil and gas industry. Your listeners probably already know that a lot of the business that's done on our public lands relies on self-reporting. So for tax purposes, for revenue purposes, we basically say, yeah, we trust y'all to give us the right information, to give us the right calculations, the right numbers on the business that's done on public land. And we're not going to check to make sure that those numbers are accurate. We're just going to trust you that they're accurate. The audit function at the state land office is the third party check on the self-reporting way that we do business in New Mexico. So essentially what we do is we have a team of well-trained oil and gas auditors that go out into the field. They pore over the books of these companies, and they ensure that business is being done properly. They ensure that we're being paid our fair share. And at the time I took office, that auditor function had a vacancy rate of 25%. We have not only beefed up that vacancy rate, we've added new positions because we feel that that is a good use of money and investment to ensure that we are auditing, that we are watching, that we are ensuring that business is being done properly on your public land. Okay, so that's one thing. The other thing is the state of the land itself, whether spills are being cleaned up, whether sites are being remediated back to their healthy state, whether wells are being properly plugged. All of that requires boots on the ground, requires individuals to do that work. And so in addition to beefing up the audit division, we have formed a brand new environmental compliance office. We call it ECO at the state land office. And these are actually trained biologists, environmental technicians who actually know how to do the work of remediation on state land, responsible for ensuring that the condition and the health of the land is to the standard that I think you and your listeners would require of a public official.
Where does your authority in that begin and end as compared to the Environment Department, the State Environment Department?
Yeah, so Environment Department, it's been interesting because we've there's a lot of overlay of regulation in New Mexico. So just really briefly, a little regulation tutorial. Water, for the most part, is regulated at the state engineer's office. Air quality, for the most part, is regulated by the Environment Department. Oil and gas regulatory function is at Energy, Minerals, and Natural Resources. What we can do, Paul, is ensure that folks using our public resource, state land, and this is anybody. I don't mean to pick on the oil and gas industry. This is anyone who uses state land, falls within the bounds of their legal contract to do so, cleans up their messes, cleans up after themselves, restores the land back to its natural state when they're finished with it, cleans up spills, properly plugs wells. So we use our contracts with users of state land to enforce the stewardship of that resource. Does that make sense?
Yes, yes, it does. I had heard that the ENMR, Energy and Natural Resource, Energy, Minerals and Natural Resources, was also significantly understaffed and not doing much by way of inspections.
They are. I mean, we are actually we have a great partnership. The nickname for that division is MNERD, and under MNERD is the Oil Conservation Division. They are responsible specifically for well plugging, and we've got a great partnership with them to try and prioritize some of our worst case scenarios in the state, so that when the federal funds begin to flow, there's been a lot of prioritization of federal funds for well plugging and cleanup, that those dollars flow to our worst case scenarios first.
Okay. So it's my understanding that New Mexico leasing rates haven't been updated in like 50 years and are far lower than Texas's rate. Has the land office lobbied the legislator to get rates raised? And if so, how did that go?
Yeah, so this is one of those questions that Paul already knows the answer to, folks. For those of you who did not follow this particular fight.
It's for my listeners who don't know.
For the listeners who don't know about this particular fight, so it is not an exaggeration to say rates that we charge oil and gas to drill your public resources have not moved in 50 years. And the last person to try and change those rates at the state legislature was actually a Republican state senator from Lee County. So what we tried to do, when I was first elected, the very first session, legislative session after I was elected, so that would have been the 2019 session, was we wanted to ask the legislature, and just as a reminder, even though the land commissioner has complete authority on any instrument on state land, the one place where I cannot negotiate terms is in the oil and gas lease. The oil and gas lease is in the Oil and Gas Act, and it is set in statute. So if I want to change any term in that act, in that lease, the legislature must act to do that, okay? So we went to the legislature. We wanted the rates changed from 20%. So essentially, when someone wants to come along and develop, drill, frack your state land, they pay us 20% of the price they get for the minerals they develop there. Well, just next door in the great progressive state of Texas, the going rate there, the market rate there, is 25%. And that may not sound like a large difference, but over the lifetime of these wells, it becomes billions of dollars. So essentially, we are leaving billions of dollars that should be going to public schools on the table because the legislature refuses to have the oil and gas industry pay the same rate, we consider it a market rate, as they do in Texas. So yes, after a 3-hour beatdown in a legislative committee, that bill to try and change the rate was killed. That doesn't mean I'm giving up. We are continuing that fight, and I've got some strategies on how we can do that if I do earn re-election from the voters, how I can make that change happen.
So what would be your prospects of coaxing an increase in leasing rates and royalties out of the legislature in 2023? Now that
so there's a couple, there's a couple of different things we could do. There's a couple of different things we could do. So the first thing is to have the beneficiaries sue, because we are not getting top dollar, we are not getting market value for them on their land. So again, the beneficiaries are New Mexico's public schools, universities, hospitals. That is one way. Another way is for us just to charge the 25% rate and expect a lawsuit. I think that I'm pretty confident that a court of law would rule in our favor, because that is the going market rate, 25%. And then the final thing I actually alluded to a little bit in my Albuquerque Journal questionnaire, Paul. Hold oil and gas leasing essentially hostage until the legislature acts.
In other words, not issue any more leases.
That's it.
So I'm a little sort of confused as to how. So in your second scenario, you're just saying you would unilaterally raise it 25%. And given that in statute, you've stated that it's in statute that the legislature has to do that, how would that survive in a court? Because you know you'd get sued.
Because the land office as a fiduciary trustee, and I would hope for a lawsuit, Paul. As a fiduciary trustee, I am held to the highest and best use of the public resource. And I don't think that a court would find that the highest and best use of 20% is sufficient when there is a market rate going market rate of 25.
Okay. I'm sorry, but we got to take a short break here just to remind our listeners that you're listening to KSFR. And it's during these times of misinformation and in social media and in the mainstream media that a straight talking news station like KSFR is, that offers you great programming about art and culture and music, as well as news and programs like the program that comes on before this show with Richard Wolff on the Economic Update, a great profile of how the economy works and doesn't work for Americans. And Democracy Now! So just great programming, but they need your support to survive. They don't charge you for access to their stations, and they don't have commercials, so they rely on you for their support. And that is something you can do when you get done listening to this show. If you can go to ksfr.org and click on the donate button, and whatever you can afford, look at it as your ticket for admission to some really great programming. And on behalf of KSFR, I want to thank you for your contribution. So we're going to get back to our discussion now with Stephanie Garcia Richard. Last week, you held two fundraisers with Jane Fonda as a featured speaker. What caused Fonda to reach out to your campaign, and what was her message?
So I had done a Zoom event, a virtual event, just around public lands. I invited a national audience who is interested in protection of public lands, the future of public lands in the United States. And someone invited Jane to be a part of that Zoom conversation. And we discussed a number of things. The Inflation Reduction Act. She's got some concerns with the deals that are inside that. We talked about the future of reliance on oil and gas in an energy producing state like ours. And just from the richness of the conversation and just, hearing kind of the importance of this race, we call it the most important race for the climate that nobody's ever heard of. She decided that she was going to add this to her list of folks that she's out campaigning for. And for those of you who don't know, Jane Fonda has turned her shining star, her spotlight, onto the climate crisis. She has become a climate champion, and she does these fire drill Fridays, where all of this can be found online. She does a lot of social media around her actions, but essentially she decided that she was going to go from being a protester, an activist, to playing in electoral politics, because we can't have policy and decisions that we can have confidence in without electing the policymakers that will back those policies. So she has a number of folks that she's supporting this electoral cycle. She has started a PAC, Jane PAC, and she speaks so eloquently and passionately about the future of our climate, about the future of our Earth, about the IPCC report, basically telling us we've got 8 years which is, 4 election cycles to make a change before we cook ourselves here on this planet.
Yeah. Well, I was sorry to have missed that. I really was. Um, well, the last time I saw you, though, it was a couple of weeks ago when we were at a rural caucus and veterans caucus combo barbecue. And it was just after some national state polls were released showing that you had a healthy lead of between 13 and 14%, but you were still worried and you seemed very worried at the time. Why was that? And have you seen any new polling data?
Yeah, so I just want to caution your viewers and listeners, Paul, and maybe even you yourself, that polling is much less reliable than it used to be. I think people know that. I think people can sense that after the 2016 presidential election, for sure. That was evident. And so we're seeing a lot of, I believe, overly rosy polls. The reason I was worried when I saw you that day was because I didn't believe in I didn't believe that the poll that you're referring to was accurate. So we have just conducted an internal poll of likely voters. We use a pollster that does not sugarcoat her results, and it shows me actually in a dead heat with my opponent.
Um,
So that was some sobering news we received last week. We have kicked everything into high gear because of the results of that poll, and are really trying to spread the word about, like I said, the importance of the race for the climate that nobody's ever heard about. This particular office of the state land office and the land commissioner can really send us backwards decades in terms of climate action, or be on the front lines of climate action.
it's a big difference. So I read recently that last year the land commissioner generated a record amount of funds, $2.4 billion. And that was on the heels of 2 robust years in your first 2 years in office. How did you achieve such a remarkable amount of revenue, and can we expect that to continue or even increase in the future, assuming you swing those votes?
So the record revenue is interesting because of the context I'm about to share. So when I was first elected to this seat 4 years ago, folks kind of looked at me warily because of my strong stances on environmental protections, on climate, and I had made some promises, like I don't take any oil and gas contributions to my campaign. So folks were like, "Oh, here comes this enviro greeny land commissioner. She's going to shut down all the business. Why does she hate New Mexico public schools so much? She's going to kill their golden goose, kind of thing." And there were negative ads on that regard as well on TV. My sister-in-law would just frantically call me like, "Why are they saying you hate school kids? Don't they know you're a school teacher?" But we came in, and not only did that not happen, that the bottom didn't fall out of New Mexico's economy, but we actually achieved the opposite. And from my perspective, what we achieved was record-breaking revenue. So we are the first administration to earn $1 billion in 1 year for New Mexico schools. We did that. We repeated that. We did a repeat of that. We did that once, and then we did it again. This past year, what we did was double that record-breaking revenue. So we took the 1 billion and doubled it to 2.4. We've done that by requiring the industry to pay their fair share. I mean, that is really the long and short of it. We implemented all kinds of administrative changes where folks, they didn't just assume that they would, receive the lease that they sought. They had to be competitive for it. They had to bid for it. They had to give a particular minimum amount, and those bids went very competitively. That is always to the advantage of the trust and the school kids, because we get more money from competitive bidding. Leases that had been held for 30, 40, 50 years, and they were paying lower rates, we leased them back out at higher rates. And so I fully take responsibility for that revenue. And like I said at the beginning of this interview, holding the line on raising revenue for school kids because that's my job. But we did that record-breaking revenue while at the same time implementing the most robust accountability program that's ever been seen at the land office. We've closed more wells, properly plugged them, cleaned up more spills, remediated more acreage. We implemented a ban on the use of fresh water for fracking. All of this while at the same time making record revenue. So we are proof positive. We are the proof that it is possible to steward the land properly and still make money for school kids in record numbers.
Vastly record numbers. That's so impressive. It just shows you if you hold people accountable and make them pay their fair share, that you can generate some serious dollars for their schools. We're going to have to close the show here, so I'd like you to take a moment to tell the people how they can find out more about your campaign and how they can support your campaign.
That's an amazing opportunity. Thank you so much, Paul. So everything about me, the wins that I've had that I just spoke about, whether you want to donate or volunteer for the campaign, we would love to have you. All of that can be found at my website, and my website is just my full name.com. So Stephanie Garcia Richard.com. And I promise you, you could even Google Stephanie Garcia Richard, New Mexico State Land Commissioner, whatever you remember from this interview, and you'll get to my website. So I would appreciate all of the support that I can get.
And I would encourage our listeners out there to really do that, because we don't want to wake up in the morning with a surprise in November. This is too important. And it's not just this race. There's a bunch of races that warrant our attention, but this one certainly is one of the most important. And I wanted to thank Stephanie for taking the time out for being with us today. Thank you very much, Stephanie. We'll continue the discussion in just a second after we close the show. We'll be back next week. I'm not sure who my guest will be, but perhaps Farm to Table Executive Director Pam Roy. But whoever joins the show, I'm sure it'll be worth your time. So until then, stay safe and healthy, and please, please do stay engaged and active. It's the only way we fix this mess. Okay. All right, we're back for the YouTube recording with Stephanie Garcia Richard, and we're going to continue on in our discussion. I had to pause there for a little bit so the radio station knows where, because I send the full recording to them, and they need to know when the radio show ended so that they can clip it, because we can't have 40 minutes in the radio show. I wish we could. So can you offer one or two concrete ways in which you differ from your opponent? Why should New Mexicans vote for you? I mean, we've heard of a boatload of reasons, but what differentiates you from your opponent?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think there's anything that doesn't differentiate me from my opponent, but I will point to some key things. And I wanted to remind folks listening to this program and watching this program on YouTube, when you hear these accusations, that Stephanie's killing business and she's bad for business, I mean, how does that argument square with record revenue? So I think we need to be a little bit critical about the negative, attacks on that we're hearing this election cycle. So I just wanted to remind folks that people are trying to make an argument that I'm killing business while at the same time making record revenue. I would say the first way,
they probably didn't mention that in the ad about the record.
So the real way that I feel my opponent and I differ is that he's had some social media posts around the EPA. And for those not familiar, that is the Environment Protection Agency. It is a federal agency that essentially ensures at the very basic level, we have clean water to drink and clean air to breathe. He's called for the abolition of the EPA and has accused me. I got this from an interview that was done earlier this week. Someone said, well, your opponent says that you're too much of a cop in the state land office, that you need to just, all you need to do is make sure business occurs. You don't need to be watching out for how business is done on state land. So this whole notion that somehow we should just trust industry to do the right thing, we don't need oversight and regulation around the protection of our natural resources, is a key difference between myself and my opponent. Yes, I am an activist land commissioner. Yes, absolutely. And I feel, no, I'm not even going to soften it with I feel. It is my obligation, my fiduciary obligation, my trust obligation set forth in the state constitution, set forth in statute, that the voters elect the land commissioner to raise revenue, but not at the expense of the natural resources. We're not going to destroy our natural resources to make money. And that is actually the mandate on this office set forth in our constitution.
Okay. So you are the first woman and the first Latina to serve as a land commissioner. Do you feel that being a woman brings a unique quality to leadership positions? And if so, how did you manifest those qualities as the land commissioner?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I mean, I don't necessarily know that women bring a unique quality. What I will say is that people's lived experiences lend unique qualities to their leadership. And the problem with not having so many women before, and not having, so many brown women, indigenous women, women of color, is that that lived experience was not part and parcel of our leadership, of the people who we elected to lead. So that's kind of the issue for me, is representation of a lived experience in the highest levels of government. And I think what that means is that, like, for me, I was raised in a middle class household. My dad was a teacher. My mom was a community organizer. I've talked actually at length about my mother, because she was a community leader in my hometown, but did not have a college education. She always used to say, "I don't have any letters behind my name."
Mhm.
But she was well regarded. She had a loud, strong voice, and it was her voice that I wanted to see represented in government, because her lived experience as an Hispana woman in New Mexico, I didn't see reflected. And so that's what matters to me about making sure that we are electing and supporting a more diverse group of leaders.
I think that if we paid our legislators and gave them staff, that might increase the proportion of people coming to the legislature with lived experience that is more mirrors the lived experience of most other New Mexicans. We got
Yeah,
kind of
we'd get a whole another set of candidates. Absolutely.
yeah, yeah. So a couple more questions. Given the dire state of the planet and the absence of strong leadership at a national and state level, even, or especially at a national and international level in climate change, what gives you hope?
Yeah, so this actually circles back to Jane, when Jane Fonda was here, because we had a lot of conversations around hopelessness versus hope and inspiration. And I think you've probably interviewed them for this program before, Paul, but there is a group here in New Mexico called Youth Organizing for Climate Action. They go by
Yes,
the acronym YUCCA.
yes.
Those young people, and I have goosebumps now just talking about them. They convey the urgency that's needed, the passion that's needed, the education and knowledge of the issues that's needed around what climate action is required for us to save our planet. And they can be incredibly forceful, and I have seen them push not only myself but other elected people to do more, to be bolder, to be out front. And their perseverance and their action and their unwillingness to compromise is incredibly inspiring to me. I've met with them on multiple occasions. I've done, we've co-presented at different things together. They've come into my office to ask me why I've done certain things, why I haven't done other things, and made me and speak to them and answer. And it's been an incredibly fulfilling part of being land commissioner to be in office at a time where these young people, these youth are pushing for more.
Well, I want to thank you for joining me today, Stephanie. And you have retake support, but we'll put out a blog probably tomorrow, if not tomorrow, Saturday, that highlights this conversation, your campaign, and provides information about how they can get information on your campaign to I'm assuming you've got canvassing going on and phone banking.
Absolutely.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you very much, Stephanie, and good luck.
Thank you, Paul. Thanks for the opportunity.
Sure. Bye-bye.